Greater equality for the LGBT community has been making headlines around the world in recent weeks. Last month, the French National Assembly passed a measure legalizing same-sex marriage. That sparked protests across the country. The bill still needs the approval of the French Senate and to be signed by the president, but it is expected to become law within a few weeks, making France the 12th country in the world that allows same-sex marriage. And research shows that global attitudes towards homosexuality are shifting. In fact, data from the World Values Survey shows that between 1993 and 2006, the proportion of people worldwide who thought homosexuality was never justifiable dropped from an average of 59% to only 34%. Homosexuality is still illegal in 38 African countries, though, and punishable by death in 7 countries around the world. So is homophobia actually on the decline around the world? Joining me now with his analysis is Renato Sabbadini. He's Co-Secretary General of the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, an international umbrella organization bringing together more than 750 LGBT groups from around the world. Renato, welcome to The Heat. Why don't I begin with...
Thank you.
Why don't I begin with one of the more egregious cases, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, and then we'll expand it further. But I'm familiar with this case in Uganda. It's a very small newspaper, Rolling Stone newspaper, not to be confused with the one here in the United States, a circulation of about 3,000. It came out and identified homosexuals and basically said these people should be hung. And there was an activist in Uganda who was killed. So can you kind of let our audience know a little bit more about this case and what's happened since then? I guess that was back in 2010, wasn't it?
Well, what's happened since then is both a reason for hopes, because the Ugandan LGBT community activated itself into a greater struggle against the piece of legislation that the Ugandan parliament is trying to pass. But also things, on one other hand, have gotten worse, because, for instance, it's news of today or yesterday that the very tomb of David Kato, who's the activist you were mentioning, was basically desecrated by the protesters, if we can use this term, of 2 evangelical priests, extremist and extremely homophobic, who gathered a group of people outside of the house of the mother of David Kato and staged the protest, basically shaming the name of her dead son.
Let me ask you about, that case has gotten a certain amount of press, what's happened in France and here in the United States in terms of attitude shifting. Can you walk us through the scale? Where are things looking good and where are there still areas that need improvement worldwide?
Well, there's no doubt, as you were mentioning before, that when you look at the surveys in the last 20 years, you see definitely a dramatic shift in the general population, in the sense that the numbers of people in most countries in the world accepting now the idea of equality for gay and lesbians and bisexual and transsexual people are the majority, basically, now. Those who protest, as was the case in France a few days ago against the proposed marriage bill there, are becoming a minority, certainly a very vocal minority, but the trend is very clear. These people are somehow now on the wrong side of history, and they are going to become a smaller and smaller minority. It's the very visibility, the growing visibility of a number of gay and lesbian activists in the last 20 years, which has made the question of what it means to recognize rights, equal rights to gays and lesbians. It has turned it from an abstract issue for many people into a very concrete issue, because thanks to this visibility, a lot of people, a lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans, a lot of Latin Americans and many other peoples do not consider anymore the issue of gay and lesbian rights as a sort of abstract issue, but as an issue concerning people they know. It might be their children, their neighbors, their colleagues. So this has definitely played into a more favorable stance.
Renato, homosexuality, though, is illegal and criminal in some of these developing countries. In fact, in some, it's even punishable by death. Are you making inroads there? Is the stigma ever going to be erased?
We are making slow inroads, first of all, at United Nations level, in the sense that now the issue of the fight against persecution of people on the basis of their sexual orientation or gender identity is on the table of the United Nations, particularly of the Human Rights Council. There was a revolutionary resolution at the Human Rights Council promoted by South Africa 2 years ago and calling for a cessation of all persecution of people on grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. On the ground, we have in many of those 78 countries where homosexuality is still illegal, we have active LGBTI groups who are fighting, of course, in very difficult circumstances, the battle from the inside of their countries. They are trying to build bridges with a part of civil society which might be most likely to be allies in this struggle.
Are you seeing progress towards greater tolerance in Asia?
Indeed, we just had our ILGA Asia, our regional conference of ILGA in Asia the last weekend in Bangkok, and we had delegates from more than 21 Asian countries for a total of 200 participants. In the other areas of Asia, if we consider China, which decriminalized in 1997, if we consider India, which had the ruling of the High Court of Delhi 2 years ago, which basically decriminalized homosexuality in India, and the fact that in a country like Thailand you have now the debate around the proposal for recognizing civil union between people of for same-sex couples, you have a picture of shadows and lights, and I would say, however, that the lights are becoming more and more shining, and the shadows are catching more and more the attention also of the rest of the world.
Renato, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us from Brussels. Appreciate it.
Thank you.